Artist,
Okay.
and she will be giving us a short rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing in commemoration of Black History Month.
Okay.
Karjane?
Hi guys. If you want to sing along, please do. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the faith that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Karjane, Carl Evans' beautiful daughter and recording artist. And we will be following your career all the way to becoming our next star. Beautiful voice.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to ask Abina Stephenson to talk to us a little bit about an important program, our mortgage assistance program. And if everyone could put their mic on mute. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, guys, and happy Black History Month. And we have a program in store for you. We certainly want to thank the vision of our chair, Ellen Nash, for being able to put this so very important discussion together for us. But in the meantime, I just want to bring to your attention that the Federal Reserve has predicted that the African American community will be the largest community to lose their homes post-pandemic. And as a result of that, and with Regina Wilson Brown, who is the executive director for the California Black Media, we are in partnership with them in a program that was formed by the National Mortgage Settlement Counseling Program and our own Cal HEFA. And this is to bring awareness and to make available to our community services for mortgage and rental relief. If you're having issues in any of those areas, we, BAPAC San Diego, have partnered with them and would like for you to pass this information on to the constituencies of the organizations that you represent, and call us at 619, and I'll put the number in the chat for you, 619-736-0220. We have HUD certified counselors on standby to assist you and to direct you so that we are not the only ones, we're not the ones who are post-pandemic and losing our homes and our housing over our heads. Again, I will put the number in the chat, 619-736-0220. So please pass this along. So, because what happens is the information does not get to our community, and this program is designed specifically for the Black community to get the word out so you can take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abina, for that very important information. We have the honor and privilege of having our own Dr. Darwin Fishman, excuse the background noise, with us. And I don't know if Dr. Miller is here with you to talk about the incarceration jail deaths. There was a state auditor's report that was put out that was quite alarming, where San Diego has the highest jail deaths in the state. And this issue is very near and dear to my heart because one of my extended members, family members, recently passed away in, I call them their jails. And so we need to get the word out. Dr. Fishman, and if Dr. Miller's here, will be telling us some actions that we could take. But I wanted to take 10, 15 minutes to just talk about this issue because it's an immediate issue here in San Diego. Dr. Fishman?
Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon. And when Yusuf comes in, I'll let him take over. Yeah, so the state auditor's report came out for in custody deaths, and I am working in the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego and also North County Equity and Justice Coalition, and we have spearheaded the campaign for trying to address in custody deaths. And we've done it through SLIC, Saving Lives in Custody, is the name of the campaign. And Yusuf Miller is the one that spearheaded this. It started through North County Equity and Justice Coalition, and then we partnered on it. We knew that the in custody deaths in San Diego were really high, and then we found out that they are the highest in California. So for counties in California, large counties, we have the highest rate of death for in custody, more than San Francisco, more than LA. And it's one of those things where I don't know how many of you even knew that or knew it before the state audit report came out, but it's been really, it's like a hidden in plain sight in San Diego. And then I just recently found out that our death rate's even higher than Rikers Island in New York. So, and we're averaging 1 or 2 deaths a month. And this has been going on for many years. And so we finally got the breakthrough with the state auditor's report and getting the validation on that state level. Thank you, Dr. Akila Weber, for spearheading that. And then I see Dave Myers here. Dave Myers and Lori Saldana helped the Democratic Party to get on board, and it put the pieces together to be able to put the pressure on the state to take this up. So we appreciate that. What we're really interested in now as we moving forward with this is partnering with BAPAC, HRC, other organizations, Human Rights Commission, and trying to get the Attorney General to take action now on the state auditor's report. We have zero confidence, of course, now with the, I mean, I was about to say Sheriff Gore. Sheriff Gore, of course, retired on the exact day that the state auditor's report came out. Timed it nicely so that he wouldn't have to face the music about this report, and left it for his underling, Martinez, who was also running for sheriff. And heaven forbid we have that continuity of for the sheriff's department where these problems persist. So because of that, we're asking, of course, then for Attorney General to get involved, California State Attorney General Bonta. And short of that, I'll personally say I have little confidence that things will change. That will, otherwise, we're risking of continuing to have 1 or 2 people die a month in our jails. And please remember, if you ever see these news reports, like in the UT, about the people dying in custody, they almost always say the person died of natural causes. We have literally, San Diego, for some reason, has these natural deaths. So there's been no oversight of this too. And it's also important to mention that the CLERB, the Civilian Oversight Law Enforcement for the County of San Diego, is very harshly criticized in this report too. They do leave out the district attorney. It goes without saying that that oversight, no one's been prosecuted, except for, if you can believe it, with over 180 people, 185, they say, that have died in custody the last 10 years. The only person that's been prosecuted by our district attorney has been a nurse, one nurse. Literally, that's it. So it's an incredible situation. It's extraordinary. This hasn't gotten national coverage, and this has not been literally an embarrassment for San Diego that we've been allowing this to persist for so long. So it's really critical that we get the attorney in general involved with this. And what we're asking is to work with BAPAC and also to do letters. So strategically, and Ellen will work this out in terms of the details, but for the Attorney General, we'd like to do is send letters from organizations and then coordinate our efforts, and then also have the county supervisor send letters to the Attorney General to see if we can have, again, have them directly intervene and apply more pressure on them for the Sheriff's Department more quickly change, or to take it over, have the state literally take it over. So thank you for this opportunity to speak and to share about our work. And we've been doing this now for years. And then this opening now, we have the state auditor's report. And again, we're looking forward to working with other organizations and expanding this work as we go forward.
Thank you, Dr. Fishman. I saw that Dr. Miller joined us, Yusuf Miller.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for having us.
Sure. We do have a few minutes. Dr. Miller, did you want to make some comments, and were there some questions from our Zoomers?
Also, let me say real quickly, I'm putting in a chat, I have a commentary that's in the UT about Sheriff Gore. So I will put that in there, and then folks can also look for it in the UT.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not doctor, but thank you for the promotion. But the critical issue here in San Diego, especially when it comes to the in custody deaths and things of that nature, is that law enforcement is in the wrong business of mental health reform. They're in the wrong business of homelessness policing or militarizing the homelessness, and they're in the wrong business of a drug rehab. The badge and the gun needs to come out of these practices for the law enforcement in general, but in the sheriff's department particularly, because they have $1 billion budget, a billion with a B, the letter B, $1 billion budget. And why? Because they're taking on these aspects that are not involved with policing. So the idea is to remove the badge and the gun from mental health reform, from homelessness outreach, and from drug addiction. And a lot of people who fall into these categories, along with the racism on top of and biased policing that draws Black and brown people into this situation, that they are doing jobs that they are not trained for. And we are suffering the consequences in the community of lost loved ones in this aspect. So we're the push overall in general, because I know Dr. Fishman probably went over a lot of the things already, and I just wanted to touch it on this particular aspect is the whole thrust, no matter how we color it, is to remove the badge and the gun from these aspects, along with equity in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? We have a few minutes. I just want to share.
Hey, Ellen.
Hi. Oh,
Hi,
hi, Lori. Let me make just one comment. The report was so startling to the extent it indicated that deputy sheriffs walk past jail cells and not check to see if inmates are breathing. It's that awful. And that's why I wanted to bring this to your attention. Lori, you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to note that it really was teamwork with Yusuf, with Darwin, with so many of the volunteers. But the Joint Legislative Audit Committee has tremendous power to grant oversight when they make these recommendations for an audit. It's a difficult process. But when I was in the legislature, I did one on the lack of hiring diversity for tenure positions in the CSU system. So I knew that we have equity issues at that state level institution. And when I listened a year ago to the Sheriff's Department defend the methodology of their audit, or they tried to do their own investigation into jail deaths, I challenged that and said, you know, you can't do an audit on yourself. We have to ask the state to do it. And that's when, as Akilah Weber's staff told me later, Lori, you let the genie out of the bottle, because up to that point, most people were not aware that these audits even existed. So it is important to hold, the state is the only agency that can hold the sheriff accountable and enforce these new requirements upon them. So I'm just so happy to have been able to be part of that, to work with Dave, with Darwin, with Yusuf, to get that to Akilah Weber. And we need to do a lot more work to make sure that the people that are in elected office don't keep that genie in the bottle. When we need oversight, when we have deaths in custody, especially when they are primarily people of color, then we have to force them to do what they don't want to do, which is hold another elected official accountable. And so I just can't say enough about the teamwork that it took to get to this point. And it is a profoundly disturbing audit. And Sheriff Gore did not retire, he resigned. He resigned because this was a devastating report. So congratulations to the team that made this possible. It's long overdue. And thank you, Ellen, for spreading the word about how this really came to be.
Thank you, Lori. Any other comments?
I just wanted to say I'm Doris Bitar with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and thank you for doing this presentation. I appreciate learning and working with you. I have been on the committees, more a fly on the wall, that Darwin and Lori and Dave Myers have been involved with, and Yusuf, of course. And it's just such an impressive group, subgroup that have brought this to bear as something important for the state, including a lot of mental health professionals. How did these people get cops to deal with them to begin with, instead of perhaps most of the time it was a mental health issue? And either they die on the spot or they die while they're being held. And the number of mental health researchers and actual practitioners that are on this group and what they've contributed is just incredible. And I'm just very proud to be a fly on the wall with these groups and join when I can. And anyway, thank you for having this event today too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi.
So any other comments?
Eleanor Evans speaking.
Yes.
I too was devastated when I heard the report. But also, I think it's real important that we have people in the sheriff's department that look like us. And that's one thing I've been advocating for years now. Whenever I spoke with Sheriff Gord, and of course he would say, "Oh yeah, we have someone," but we really need fair representation. I think that would help alleviate or at least bring sensitivity to the people who are incarcerated or who are potentially to be incarcerated. And that, of course, that goes back to the school system making those kinds of opportunities, making our scholars aware of those kinds of opportunities. You know, that you need a high school graduation diploma to be a sheriff, and you're making $75,000 a year. You know, that's remarkable. That's remarkable. And so many of our students are not aware of that.
Thank you, Eleanor. I wanted to, before we hand this over to our illustrious panel, I wanted to remind everyone, please put your questions in the chat. Please make sure you're on mute. This is Facebook Live and YouTube. And if you could put your email addresses in the chat, that would be appreciated as well. Some of the action items that we've been asked to take on, I will be communicating with you via email and through our newsletter. So I want to make sure we capture all the email addresses who are attending this call today. We're going to get right into our discussion and why we're here. We thought in commemoration of Black History Month that we bring up this particular issue on critical race theory, which has been all over the media and our newspapers. And you're folks like me, you're asking, well, what does all that mean? Or what is critical race theory? So today we have the opportunity to hear from some incredible experts on this topic. I want to introduce you to our moderator for this afternoon, our own Professor Darius Spearman. He is currently the chair of the San Diego City College Africana Studies Department. He's an author of Between the Color Lines, a history of African Americans in the California frontier from 1769 through Reconstruction. He's the founder of African Elements, Explorations, and Black and Africana Studies. He's our moderator. Our panelists are our own Eleanor Evans, who is currently a trustee for the Oceanside Unified School District Board of Education and serves with humility on the Leon Williams Human Relations Commission. She's a believer in quality education for all. Eleanor serves on the California State Board of Education, Credentials Proficient Commission Teacher Credentialing. And then we have our own San Diegan, now via New York, Anthony Conwright. He's a native of San Diego, and he's currently in New York. Anthony is a writer with the bylines on the nation, Mother Jones of the Republic. He is also a writer fellow with Kimberly, what's her last, I can't see her last name here.
Crenshaw.
Okay. Crenshaw, who is one of the original founders of critical race theory, if I'm correct. And where he writes under her tutelage about this particular subject and several other subjects. Anthony is a native San Diegan, born and raised. I was almost by his bedside when he was born, but I know him. He's a very good friend of my son. They share the same birthday month. And so he is, I call him my son. I'm so proud of him. When I saw on Alicia Mendez last Saturday, sitting on my couch on MSNBC, and there she brought up Anthony Conwright's piece on critical race theory in the Mother Jones publication. I said, oh my God, we have to have him. We have to have Anthony. And that's how all of this came together, to be honest with you, because of that article. And I thank Professor Spearman to volunteering to come on at the last minute, in the last week or so, and Commissioner Evans and also Anthony Conwright. I really thank you, because we put this together in a week's time. but it's definitely needed and timely. I'm going to turn the floor over to our own Professor Spearman, and he's going to take it from here. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. And we're here until 2 o'clock today. Thank you very much. I'm going to put my phone on my Zoom on mute because I'm at the World Beat Center and there's a lot going on down here. And I encourage all of you to come down and support. This is one of Dr. Blair's favorite places to hang out, was at the World Beat Center. So we're gonna also attribute this convening to Dr. Blair's honor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It looks beautiful out there at the World Beat Center. So maybe I'll join y'all over there later on. But I want to start by just thanking Ellen Nash and the San Diego chapter of the Black American Political Association for inviting me to take part in this panel. And it's an honor to join both Eleanor Evans and Anthony Conwright on this panel. So I'm pleased to meet you both, and thank you for joining this panel. I wanted to start by just sort of laying the land on critical race theory in terms of where we're at right now. Critical race theory dates back to the 70s and 80s. It was a coin termed by scholar Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. And the current discussion on critical race theory, there's a sort of long historical through line of redefining terms. The moment we start understanding something through a particular lens, there's oftentimes this effort to redefine or refocus what those terms mean. Going back to, for example, there was even textbooks referring to enslaved Africans as immigrant workers, if you can believe that. And affirmative action got reframed as reverse discrimination. Even the goals of the civil rights movement somehow got reframed as somehow we were fighting for a colorblind society. And even if, for those of you who are old enough to remember the 1996 Proposition 209, which was an anti-affirmative action proposition, was placed on the ballot as the California Civil Rights Initiative. And so, I remember throughout that campaign that there were 4 words of one Martin Luther King speech that were played repeatedly throughout the campaign by those folks who were supporting the so-called California Civil Rights Initiative. And it seems nowadays that the words "I have a dream" are most often quoted by folks on the right and trying to co-opt its meaning. Currently, last article I read, 36 states have introduced laws, policies, or school board actions to restrict education on racism, bias, the contributions of specific racial or ethnic groups in the United States history or related topics, and they're being introduced as anti-critical race theory measures. As the anti-critical race theory or CRT legislation and sentiments increased over the past year, so have attempts to ban books that discuss race, gender, or identity. Books from Black authors that have joined the banned list include Toni Morrison's Beloved, Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kiley's All-American Boys, Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give, and Keith Lehman's Heavy, among many others. And along this through line of anti-critical race theory efforts, the notion of critical race theory and the measures against it have been framed as nationwide efforts from lawmakers to restrict the teaching of divisive concepts. So I want to start this discussion with Anthony Conwright, given where you are under the tutelage of Kimberly Crenshaw. First, what is critical race theory, and is it divisive?
So when we think of critical race theory, people kind of tend to associate critical race theory with particular content. So it's not actually constrained by content. Think about critical race theory as something you do. So it's a method to look at laws or let me backtrack. It's a method to understand why racism and white supremacy persist, even though there's been quote unquote progress, right? And so critical race theory is something you do to understand that. Now, not divisive at all. It's just that people on the right had no way of justifying the murder of George Floyd. They had no way of twisting what happened because we all saw it on tape. And as the murder of George Floyd took place, she had someone named Christopher Rufo in Seattle who was on a campaign against homelessness. And his solution was, well, we just need more police to arrest homeless people. But what was going on was that the city was saying, no, wait, we have to look at homelessness and poverty as part of a structure within white supremacy. And that always frightens people who are racist, because you can't just arrest Black people who you see as infringing on your property, which ironically has roots in history. And if you use critical race theory, you can find a way to backtrack into the way in which vagrancy laws were passed right after emancipation. So, and then when you look at the bills, they actually aren't banning critical race theory, there's a sort of irony in that, because what they're really looking to ban is work by white women, and I don't mean to debase their work. I think it was done in good faith, but you kind of have to understand why this particular work is being targeted. So if you look at the concept of white privilege, it's a white woman. Robin DiAngelo in White Guilt, that's a white woman. And they cite critical race theory, or Robin DiAngelo cites critical race theory maybe twice in her book. And so Republicans saw that, and the irony is they're using sort of this white woman's work to now attack this Black woman in Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the phrase intersectionality. So there's a real irony there in that. But I want to make sure, at least when we're talking about critical race theory, that we don't necessarily conflate white guilt, white fragility into what critical race theory is, because those are two different projects with two different goals. One focuses on individual racism, which we saw lots of white people wanting to do after George Floyd. And the other piece is about structural racism, like Professor said, which has been around since the 70s.
Thank you. And Eleanor, where you're at on the school board, how do you see critical race theory as it manifests in the work that you do, and is it divisive?
The work that we do, we do not teach critical race theory in our schools. We are just now getting into ethnic studies, getting into Black history being taught 10 times each month for the school district, but we do not teach critical race theory. I think that's very, very important to understand, that there's a separation in terms of how it's being presented to us as board members. And of course, we have parents that are very vocal, who say that critical race theory is calling them a racist when we're not doing that. In fact, the term really wasn't prevalent with most of the board members throughout the state of California until we start getting this, for want of a better term, backlash of parents suddenly appearing saying that you're teaching critical race theory. And no, we're not. I think as we develop, as the state of California mandated that we do teach ethnic studies, and Oceanside always been the vanguard and ahead of other school districts, and having a curriculum focusing on ethnic studies, that has been the cloak to critical race theory has been the cloak to prevent school districts from moving ahead with ethnic studies. Okay. In terms of being divisive, yes, when it's being presented the way it's being presented, it is divisive. But at the same time, we are very focused on what we need to do in terms of educating our scholars, educating our youth. And we're very much involved in not only the academics of them knowing their true history, what the facts are, but we're also very much involved with developing their social and emotional learning, so that, you know, one group is not feeling that they should feel any kind of guilt, or the other group should feel inferior or less than because of what they've read in the textbooks, because we're removing those kinds of ideas from the textbooks. I know personally as a student, when we did any kind of history that related to Blacks, seemingly it always started with slavery. And I know growing up in my family, I knew about pre-European history in terms of contributions of Black people to the history of the world. And as a classroom teacher and as administrator, I presented that, that we didn't suddenly appear as slaves. We were doing other things. And as the economics of this country developed, we suddenly found ourselves as being viewed only as slaves, when that's not a reality in terms of world history, even US history.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me as odd about this backlash against critical race theory is that it's largely taking place at school boards in K through 12, and generally speaking, critical race theory isn't taught in K through 12, and also the way it's presented, as you said, as teaching that all white people are racist, or accusing white folks of being racist. Critical race theory, as I understand it, doesn't necessarily concern itself with the action of individuals, but more systemic racism. Anthony, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's a very important distinction to make, that the whole, if you're white and there's no sort of redemption, really comes more from white fragility and white guilt, those two concepts, which critical race theory isn't concerned with. And I think it's really important to kind of talk about the project that's doing for people to focus on individual racism, when the reality is the point of critiquing structural racism is to make it so that the individual racism has no power over Black people. And so it doesn't matter, and Bayard Rustin said this, is like the civil rights movement wasn't about getting white people to love us. It was trying to figure out ways to limit their structural power from impacting us in society. But because the murder of George Floyd was so horrific, and Republicans saw how much it impacted white people in society, you're talking about a global movement that is rooted in the grotesque murder of a Black man. That was powerful, and that scared people on the right, because how do you can't say, well, he had a gun. You can't say, well, we don't know what happened before, because it's all on tape. And it was strong enough to create a global movement. And how do you attack that? Well, you don't attack it. You attack the work that sort of moved people to band together against structural violence. Like, I don't think we kind of understand how, I don't want to, for the purpose of this, I'll say radical, defund the police is, but imagine how long in society it's been since something that radical became an issue. And that's saying something. And so it's not necessarily about individual racism, but that's just the kind of abracadabra that Republicans are pulling in order to fool families.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you hit on a couple of things that I want to explore a little bit more, as far as Bayard Rustin, and he wasn't the only one who said that, the goal isn't to get white folks to love us, but to limit the ways in which to basically harm reduction. So from a critical race theory standpoint, let's say hypothetically a society agreed to treat everyone, including people of color, exactly the same. Would the condition of communities of color improve? Would that be long run, short run? Let's start with Anthony, and then I want to get Eleanor's thoughts on it.
Well, I don't know. I think, and then I'm also hesitant on how we talk about like communities of color, because I think it's very important to, if we are talking about Black people, we say Black. if we're talking about anybody else, like we say that because we all don't, not to get too kind of philosophical or too deep, we don't enter existence in this country the same way. And so I think we kind of have to be very, purposeful, but like I think you could take a critical race theory lens to even policing, right? Like, so you could take a law, drug laws, you could take employment laws or vagrancy laws. You can say there's this new police reform initiative. Well, where does this idea come from? Where did this law come from? So now we have a place in which to root this thing in historical context. So now you just go backwards. So then we can say, oh, well, convict leasing or sharecropping or whatever, vagrancy laws, whatever it is we're talking about, has roots in history that's tethered to slavery. And then you can unpack from there. And I think, and I think you can sort of do that, and you probably can apply that to groups of to different races. But I think for Black people, there seems to be something that is really triggering the anxieties of Republicans.
So what I sort of hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I sort of hear you saying is that the grandfather clause treated everyone equally. Yet it didn't necessarily benefit. It wasn't intended to benefit Black folks.
Right. Same. Like right. Or with what did you mention earlier? Oh God, affirmative action.
Right, yeah.
Is a perfect example. But I also when we're talking about history and kind of in framing this as an attack on history, I also want to kind of make it clear that it is and it isn't. And I think we have to be very careful about that and kind of how we're framing the logic of what history does. So it isn't as if, for example, we know that there's a history of sexual assault against women in this country, but that doesn't stop sexual assault or rape. We know that there's a history of racism. You can ask Mitch McConnell, if he knows any sort of history of racism, he'll tell you yes, but he still can't help himself, right? And so there's something else that's psychically happening there. And I think people on the left tend to because we kind of typically value enlightenment and higher learning and all those things, we do kind of frame it as within a context that's very important to us. We also have to understand sort of slavery or racism or sexism. It's not sort of rooted in ignorance. And so I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chats, and we'll get to some of the critiques of critical race theory from the left as well. But Eleanor, your thoughts on, so let's say if everyone agreed to treat people exactly the same, what would that change?
The idea of everyone being equal and being treated equally is phenomenal, but it's not a reality because we all have deficits. We all come with, different issues and different concerns and different focus. I think the real issue is that can we have equity so that every person, whatever they may like or whatever they exceed in, can be utilized to benefit society and the greater good and benefit themselves. I think that's what the key is. Historically, we've looked at quote unquote situations where separate but equal, was supposed to exist and it did not. We've had Black towns, we've had Black cities, we've had Black banks, and each and every case, they've either been destroyed by outside forces or they've been destroyed from within. So the issue is not really equality, the issue is equity. And how do we identify that and promote that?
Yeah, thank you. This next question I want to direct towards Ellen because I'm seeing a lot of the attacks, whether they're informed or not, attacks on quote unquote critical race theory. Now we can argue about whether or not actual attack on critical race theory, but what's being framed at least as an attack on critical race theory is basically the notion that critical race theory is pessimistic. It teaches that the United States is a racist country, and it promotes a certain nihilism. Is critical race theory pessimistic?
Are you asking us?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on on people who would say that critical race theory is a pessimistic way of looking at the world?
I think it's very negative, honestly. I really do. You know, I grew up with my parents telling me I could be whatever I wanted to be, and that it was up to me and take advantage of every opportunity, regardless of how sliver that opportunity was. If you bombard with people saying that, you know, you're less than, you can't achieve, you know, you 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 burden them with all of this barrage of burdens, people are going to feel down. You know, critical race theory as it's been presented to us on the West Coast does basically say that, you know, people of color, Black people are less than, and because of slavery, you know, they feel, or they've been taught to feel that they're less than. And the reality of the situation is not that.
So should
Yeah.
should students be taught about that the United States is at its core a racist or systemically racist?
I think students, you know, all of us are aware that there is racism in this country, and there's racism worldwide. There's racism within, if you believe in race, which I don't believe in, but I'll use that just for point of clarification. There's racism with one group of people, with another group of people, and there's racism within the commonality of race with people. So yes, racism is a reality. It's what is your approach to that? You know, people, you know, people have what we call implicit biases. All right. And some of those implicit biases do come about as suddenly are being interpreted as being racism. But all of us have implicit biases for whatever situation, for whatever group of people or other individuals. And that's the
I
reality.
just think, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Anthony. Does critical race theory promote a pessimistic outlook on the United States?
No, it doesn't. And if it did, I don't think that's a problem. I think we are kind of obsessed with the idea of sort of a redemption narrative and hope in America that I think is untenable. And, you know, while we all might have implicit bias, everyone's power in that is the same. I just don't think it's the logic applies to even the George Floyd. He might have had implicit black bias. Who died? Yeah, like Trayvon Martin may have had an implicit bias. He's dead. So, and we can say, yeah, like race doesn't exist. And I think, yeah, we can all understand, like it's not biological, it's not rooted in anthropology. Like, sure, it doesn't exist, but we fall into a habit of only applying that to Black people. And that's the only race that we would ever say doesn't exist, because we don't have any power in that social construct. And so how, you know, but and I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I mean, gender's made up. We don't say, well, there's just no such thing as gender. There are lots of things that are made up, but we only apply that type of erasure to Black people. And even if race does exist, it doesn't mean that you have to be racist. Like it's not, it doesn't sort of, it's not the father of the problem. You know, like being Black is not the problem. There's something else. The people who projected it onto us have the issue. And I think it's very important to sort of just parse that out. And I think you can teach critical race theory. You can talk to a kid. I used to teach 6th grade, and I would tell them, like, look, this is the reality of a situation. This is what you might face in society. So when we're talking about poverty, this is where this thing is coming from, right? And you have to fight within a system to relieve yourself of the struggles. It doesn't mean you can't tell them that the struggle is rooted in racism and then all of a sudden they're powerless. No. That literally defies the American claim that you can pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, right? And if they're impacted by racism, we might as well tell them. If we're saying, yeah, there's racism in the world, we know this is an anti-Black country, well, then we got to tell them, hey, this is how you got to navigate the plantation. You can't tell them that they're not on a plantation. You have to tell them how to navigate it. And I think while it is complicated and it is difficult, you can talk to them about it.
As long as we're talking about race and the importance of race, whether it exists as a biological construct or a social construct, I want to get to one of the critiques of critical race theory on the left, and that's this notion of race versus class. Bernie Sanders brought this up in his campaign, and he's been called out on it. And I think he still holds that belief that class is more important than race. Is race or class more important in determining one's life chances? Let's start with Eleanor, and then we'll move to Anthony.
Is race more important than class?
Yeah, in determining one's life chances.
Well, when you're born and you're born Black, you know, parents know that there's going to be a certain societal ceiling for that child, and parents will, at least my parents worked very hard to make sure that that child is equipped to be able to go past that ceiling if possible. Class, quite frankly, the United States is really, we say it's a classless society, that everyone has the opportunity, but I'm very much aware of differences in terms of people who may have the same income, but do not have the same opportunity in terms of being able to function, quote unquote, in a classless society. So to say which one is more important, one is we look at in terms of socioeconomics, but in terms of race kind of, like you may have a millionaire and be Black, and you may be poor and be white. But as someone once said that, that poor white person would not want to be that Black millionaire. So, I have to say that, in some areas, race does supersede class.
Thanks. And Anthony, is race or class more important in determining one's life chances?
Race. I mean, of course, now back in the day, I was a Bernie guy. If you Google me or look at articles, you will find me saying that. But I disagree. I disagree with this formulation. I think, so poverty might exist for white people, but Black people experience what's called concentrated poverty, which is a different sort of strata of the experience. And even when you look at neighborhoods where what you might call wealthy Black folks live, typically, we live in District 4, and there tends to be sort of an existence of even violence in District 4 that if you take a family and put them in Point Loma, they're not experiencing. And so I think you have to look at race before you look at anything else.
And another critique of critical race theory from the left is that, given the sort of central premise that racism is systemic, does it make sense to address racism within the system or outside of the system? Let's start with Anthony, and we'll go to Eleanor.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. I think so. I guess one way to kind of look at that question is to understand or to think about what it would mean to fight within the system and sort of outside the system. So are you talking within the system, like becoming a member of Congress or something like that?
Well, for example, I wanted to address another question to Ellen later on, but it might make sense to wrap it up with this question. According to the Harvard Civil Rights Project in 2004, to 50 years to commemorate Brown versus Board of Education, they issued a report, and according to that report in 2004, schools were just as segregated in 2004 as they had been in 1969. So obviously Brown versus Board of Education is sort of the landmark case from the NAACP, which tends to work within the legal structures within the system to create change. But what we're seeing is that, generally speaking, as fast as you work through the system kind of self-corrects,
Right.
if you can call it that.
Right. I think so. I think you kind of have to have an inside game and an outside game, right? And so, I think we see that with sort of protesters, Black Lives Matter, and then you might see it in the squad in Congress. So I think those things are really important. But I think within that critique on the left is sort of an answer for the left. And for me, I think the left has to do a way better job at focusing on local elections, because these people on the right aren't playing. They said, fine, you take the presidency, we will take everything else. And so I think we really have to start there. I know it's not the most kind of appealing, sexy way of doing politics, but it's the most gritty and the most important. And so if we have more folks on the left who are willing to hop on school boards, become local elected officials, then we can really, really see some change, because doing things at the federal level just becomes so difficult. And you really don't see large initiatives happening on the federal level until they happen locally first. And so I think we kind of have to start there.
Yeah. And Eleanor, given your seat on the Oceanside School Board, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this. Is it feasible to create structural systemic change from within if you can call it a structurally racist system?
Absolutely. It's hard. It's frustrating sometimes, but like I always say, it's better to be at the table than to be on the menu. With the school system, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education basically focused on the overt discrimination, overt segregation that was going on. And I know in San Diego, we had the Collin case, which also, focused on the fact that at that time, Lincoln High School supposedly was segregated. And the issue was that because it was segregated, education was less than at Lincoln High School. And with this case, the gentleman lived in La Jolla, quote unquote, and he felt that students at Lincoln should be able to go everywhere. The irony was that he did not send his children to Lincoln. And when, quote unquote, Lincoln desegregated, our students, they took only the A students. And when they found out they didn't have enough, they took the B students and they took the athletes. So they took all the quote unquote role model of students. My feeling was that we can create, we can educate, we can create our own, those C students can now become A's and B students. So I firmly believe that you have to work within, and by the same token, you do have to work without. The without pressure, without creates the pressure, within generates the knowledge in terms of how do you succeed. And there has to be communication between those who feel that, they are in the out group, and those who feel that, who think they're in the in group. We can't have this division going on. We have to work together and, to push forward together to be successful. I think it's real important that we not think of someone over there and someone else over here, but that we look at our commonality of experiences and that we are able to move forward.
Yeah, thank you. And again, that's something that I struggle with. That's a question that I struggle with where I live at San Diego City College. As an institution that inherently does perpetuate inequality. And there are certain ways that I deal with that, but that's always on my mind. And I love City College. City College, I've taught at 5, 6 different campuses. City College that's my home. I mean, out of all the campuses that I've taught at, it is the most uh, social justice oriented institution that I've been at. But still, that's a struggle because especially sitting in Black studies, our curriculum is there to address a population that may or may never get within the halls of higher education. So how do you deal with that? The way I deal with it is I put my lectures on YouTube for everybody to see, and I've taught free classes in the community as well at places like Pillars of the Community in Southeast. But yeah, that's a question that it's a tough one, and I want to stay on this topic of creating change from within, creating systemic change from within a system that is inherently racist. It was brought up earlier that about policing, and one of the goals in policing is to get more Black people on the police force. What do you see that as a viable solution? I mean, is it possible, even if you have Black folks within the police force, even if you have Black folks who are sheriffs, is it possible to be anti-racist from within the structure of a structurally racist organization? Let's start with Anthony. Yeah.
So I don't know in terms of like every time I hear anti-racist, I keep like, how can you be like anti the world? But I just spent probably 5 hours last week just talking to Black officers, and so this is where people are going to say, see, this sounds so pessimistic, but here's the thing. You can't, like, Black bodies in a space doesn't necessarily constitute like anti-racism, right? Because as the professor said, the system finds a way to self-correct. And so you have to, and I get there's lots of problems with the police. However, just talking to one Black woman who's a detective out here in New York, listening to her story just about how she had to fight racism just to get in. We're not even talking about when she's actually in, just to get into the force, she had to fight the racism. Then she gets in it. And not only is she Black, she's a woman. So she's got to combat Black men and white men. And so, like, and to expect just individuals to take down entire structures, it's important to have them in there, but like Professor said, the system self-corrects. And so we had a case out here in New York where sergeants were telling officers to meet arrest quotas because that's how they determine whether or not you are a good police officer. And those are the officers that get promoted, right? And so you have a situation where Black people are in this structure that moves them to be racist, moves them to jail other Black people. And we might hate it, but at the end of the day, we all have, well, I shouldn't say we all have families, but some of us have families, some of us have kids, all of us got bills to pay. And sometimes you're moved to things that are sort of antithetical to your goal. And so part of my mind says, yes, we do need people on the inside because it is helpful. And then the other part of my mind is when we see Black folks, let's say in law enforcement, even though we have legitimate critiques about law enforcement, we got to support the ones that are looking to do that work on the inside instead of lumping every police officer into sort of the same problematic framing, if that makes sense. And so if Black Lives Matter, that includes Black police officers who are trying to do the right thing, and we got to find a way to support those officers.
Yeah, and before we go down to Ellen, there was a comment in chat. It's tough to speak from the inside, and I want to just stay with that for a second, because I think I remember hearing about the case that you spoke of where the arrest quotas were brought up, and there was a couple of officers, as if I'm remembering correctly, that had recorded that and released those recordings, and those officers were subsequently fired.
Right.
Am I
That's
remembering
exactly
that correctly?
Yeah, 100%. And there's actually there's a film. It's called not Law and Order. Oh my God, Crime and Punishment. It's called Crime and Punishment. It was released in 2018. You can watch it on YouTube right now. And there's a scene that sticks out to me because when I was in 6th grade, I had Dare come to Webster Elementary, and my officer was a Black man, Officer Mondesir. And I said, we were able to write questions and put them in the question box. So my question was, what does it feel like to put other Black men in jail? Or other people? I didn't gender it. How does it feel to put other Black people in jail? And he looked at the question and he looked at me and he said, it tears my heart up. And he explained to me, or to the class, how much it hurt him to arrest Black people. And in the film, there's a scene where there's a Black officer, and I think I'm not sure if it's his sergeant, but there's an officer who ranks above him, and he makes him arrest someone, makes him do it, and you see just the agony on this man's face because he has to meet the quota. And here right now, that case isn't solved, but we have a Black mayor, Black police commissioner, and it's kind of, and we're sitting here kind of like, what in the world is going to go on? And so it becomes extremely tough to support those specific Black officers when we allow ourselves to say, every single police officer is the problem. Like, how can we show up for our people if that's the kind of framing that we address the problem with? But I understand the framing of it at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a dilemma.
Right.
And I'm sure we're going to get some more comments on that. But again, that brings up the question: is it possible to be to promote systemic change if raising that voice of systemic change means you get fired from the organization? So, Eleanor, what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I just want to say that, interject that I taught at San Diego City College for 17 years. But to address your question, my uncle was the very first Black sheriff in Cape Charles, Virginia, and he was the sheriff for many years. And he was faced with that kind of questions, those kinds of dilemma. And the issue, he wore the uniform. He very much, it was a heartbreaking job for him, quite frankly. And when we put Black officers or anyone, Black teachers, Black administrators, Black business people, in corporate America, are they there to placate us or are they there to be role models? Are they there to placate the affirmative action or, make sure that the Black community is being, again, placated? They need to have the power of their position. If you're really going to eliminate systemic racism, then you do need people within and people without. But again, you can have the most wonderful job in the world, but if you don't have the power really to implement policy, implement change, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. People may think on the outside that, wow, you're doing all of this, when in reality, you are just within your own self surviving. So I think, again, you can't look at a Black police officer and say, oh, he's one of those cops. You have to realize he is a human being, and he has to make decisions every single day that may tear at his heart. And we need to be at the same time supportive of him within his position.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a couple other things I wanted to get to. Before I do, let me just say City Pride. So San Diego City College. Just moving, because I'm seeing that there's a lot of activity in the chat, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that we get to those. But a couple of things that I wanted to get to. So moving forward, what do you see as the role of leftist political theory, such as critical race theory, in the years ahead? Where do you see it? Where do you see it going?
Oh man, that's a big question. I think well, I think a couple of things, and it sort of relates to kind of what we were talking about with the police officers, and the fact that there are a lot of people who didn't even know. I mean, I didn't know about the Black officers in the lawsuits about the quotas. And as I'm kind of thinking about it as we're speaking, I'm like, wow, we really did, the left is right now like really focused on silencing or getting Joe Rogan removed from Spotify, but not supporting those Black officers who are literally trying to do something that would change policing in a huge way. And they had, in terms of the city, we should have, if we had known, we should have been able to band together and protest in the way we did with the Black Lives Matter movement, because you're talking about a very specific policy. And so when I think of the future of critical race theory and how it sort of pertains to left politics, I think what's difficult is right now we're in this, we sort of Black people in sort of our within our paradigm, we live in this weird paradigm where there's like a phobia to us, and that's kind of how we experience, like white supremacy racism. And there's this weird obsessive love for us when it can placate the needs of people, white folks on the left, right? And so when it's time to get Donald Trump out of office, they love Black Lives Matter, they love talking about structural racism, they love all these things. But when it comes to Joe Biden, it's like, well, no one frames things, well, this is Joe Biden's America anymore. And so I think what we have to get back to, and this is weird coming from a non-believer, but we need sort of the language and voice of the church, and we need that sort of ground game that we kind of had. And I think we've kind of lost that because we've been so enveloped into a political party. And I understand, I'm not trying to do a false equivalency thing here, but I think we have to make sure that our relationship to the apparatus of the state is one of antagonism. So that way there is no, well, Joe Biden's got the Black vote. No, you don't. You don't. Yeah. Here's an issue. Here we're if you want our vote, you need to get rid of quotas. And we're willing to sacrifice as a block to save the people who are going to be impacted by this thing. And I think that's what we lost. And I think we kind of have to get back to that, but it's hard because it's a risk.
Yeah. It reminds me of Malcolm X's critique of the March on Washington, where, he didn't see the sense in, he criticized the March on Washington for the fact that the Kennedy administration endorsed it.
Right.
And so he was like, well, how are you gonna, petition the government for grievances, and you're inviting the government to participate in this march, and the government is endorsing this march. So yeah, interesting. It just kind of popped up for me in terms of the position that I think we need to take in our stance toward the government, no matter who is in office. Eleanor, your thoughts on left political theory, critical race theory? Where are we going with it?
Hopefully, we're not going anywhere with it. It's really been a block for our schools in terms of, it's a theory that the schools do not teach. It's a theory that, like as Anthony has says, that was pulled to whether it's the ultra right or ultra left is utilizing in terms of really preventing us from moving forward in terms of teaching ethnic studies, in terms of teaching Black history. And we need to get the information out to all of our students, so they can have the knowledge, the information. They can understand where they're coming, where their history was or is, and how they can utilize that to improve themselves. In terms of students moving forward, education is going to be the key. And I agree, the church, we need to get back to our own foundations in terms of how we develop and grow and face the many problems that exist in this country. CRT, hopefully it will fade away. But in reality, it's this year it's CRT, but before we talked about in terms of, we teach our children that, racism is there, and we need to teach them how to face it, how to prepare for it, how to use it to their disadvantage or to their advantage. I think one of the things that I know in my own personal case, I was always underestimated. And of course, within groups, I was always underrepresented. It was like me and no one else. The Black, first Black female, first Black, whatever. And I think that because I had at least some wherewithal in terms of my own history, I think that was an important factor in my being able to deal with, some of the issues that I had to face.
Yeah, thanks. And this last question before we get to questions is, I wanted to start with Eleanor on this question again, because where you're situated in the school board. The current sort of climate reminds me a lot of Naomi Klein's book, Disaster Capitalism, where she talked about, disasters being used as economic opportunities, right? And so currently we find ourselves in a global pandemic moving towards an endemic where, the current sort of landscape or climate it looks like it's going to be the new normal. And so the COVID disaster has, in terms of disaster capitalism, the COVID disaster has been a catalyst to justify a move towards online education. And can you talk about both COVID and the move towards fully online education in the context of critical race theory, how it's impacting Black students?
Well, one of the things we've come to realize is that in our community of Oceanside, how limited Wi-Fi is, broadband is, students having access to computers. In our district, we basically gave every student a computer to take home. Every student has access to hotspots because we gave them hotspots. Mm-hmm. It was really a rude, wide awakening in terms of the lack of technology in our homes. Yeah. Our population of Blacks is only 4%. We're 68% Hispanic, and about maybe 5% Asian. But the pandemic made everyone realize what a deficit all of our students we're experiencing. Growing up, I always heard that schools without walls, and we think of, over in Africa, students are outside looking, using computers to work. But in some ways, the pandemic has made us realize that it is a new normal. And in some ways, students have access to more information, more knowledge, because of they now have a computer. Where we're going to go with this, it's going to be interesting for the future. It's a catalyst for change, definitely. I'm personally looking forward to see how we're able to really meet the needs of our students. My concern is that if students are at home, it's very easy to turn that computer off. It's very easy to put a picture up and do something else, So if students are home, they still need to be monitored. All right. The pandemic did do us a disservice in terms of, quote unquote, students not being able to achieve where they should achieve. There was a certain academic loss, but at the same time, our students are resilient, and their knowledge in terms of, we've been saying, computer skills should be, embedded into the curriculum. Well, because of the pandemic, computer skills are now being embedded into the curriculum. We're able to personalize, individualize education even more so, be it at whatever level that student is. So, like I said, it is a new normal, and we're kind of treading our way through very carefully, but at the same time, we know that we have a phenomenal generation of students coming up.
Yeah, and so again, just to sort of add on to that, multiple studies have shown how Black and Latino students have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic in terms of getting sick, but also losing relatives and having additional responsibilities placed on them. The convergence of COVID and the push towards online education. Anthony, what's your thoughts on that from a critical race theory lens?
I think we all should kind of just indulge me in this little thought kind of experiment. So to kind of, I want to demystify critical race theory as this like kind of juggernaut thing that we don't have access to. And I think I might be able to kind of explain it through example using curriculum, since that's kind of the topic. So anybody who has kids, anybody who's ever worked in education has encountered this question. Miss, Mr., teacher, how come we have to learn this? And that comes from somewhere. Now, what might be the historical roots that impacts what we learn and why we learn it? Well, we kind of have to go back a little bit into history. So we've kind of proposed this question, right? I haven't said in this question, well, America is this racist, irredeemable place, and education is irredeemable, and because it's racist, we might as well just burn down school in general, right? Haven't said that. We're just asking a question. Where does the content come from? Well, our content comes from 100 white men who got together in 1892. Well, why was it all white men? Well, it isn't as if Black people had been fully thought of as humans before that time, and they weren't allowed into colleges. And this group of men were convened by the National Education Association. And so there was a committee of 10 white men. And those 10 white men got 10 other white men, and they all got together and they said, well, let's think about social studies. What should kids learn in social studies? Those 10 men got together and they said, well, they should learn world history, they should learn European history, and some aspects of US history, right? So because there's no Black people in this room, right? Guess what's left out? Black history. So now we can jump to, that's why we had to fight for ethnic studies. That's why we had to fight for Africana studies, because it wasn't included in the original framing of our content, which was created by 10 or 100 white men. That's what critical race, that's all it is. And that was a crude example. That's all. In that, I didn't say white people are irredeemable. All we did was talk about why something is the way it is now. So why do we have to fight for Black history? Why do we have to fight for all these things that white people don't have to fight for? Because there is a system that was created by them and it's been preserved. You think college admissions were always disproportionately impacted Black folks? Well, there wasn't even always college admissions the way we conceive it, but we created a system that is based on the exclusion of people, and guess what happens? Black folks are excluded. And so that's all critical race theory does. And so I do hope it's actually integrated more into the system, because look at what we just had to do to think about that. We have to use critical thinking. We'd have to read a little bit. And if you're in the classroom, maybe your teacher says, well, write something. What curriculum would you write, little Johnny? What do you think it's important to learn? Little Johnny, who lives in Southeast San Diego, might say, I want to know why, I want to learn how to, I want to learn about money. Oh, okay, great, little Johnny. Now, because we've interrogated the roots of our system, we can now think about how to undo that. And that's an academic practice. And so critical race theory is not this like impossible juggernaut to understand. It's just that it's presented in the wrong way. And so I kind of wanted to just put that in everyone's hearts and minds to kind of understand, like when we're talking about what critical race theory does and what it is, like that's all it is. It's really no more than that. So I do hope that it sticks around.
Yeah. So let me just refocus the question, and I loved your explanation, but kind of what I was getting at is that there are systemic ways in which Black and brown folks have been borne a disproportionate burden during this COVID pandemic, now endemic. And now they're being asked to attend school from home, where they may or may not have computers, they may or may not have Wi-Fi access, they may or may not be sharing those computers or Wi-Fi access with other family members. What might be the role of critical race theory in understanding and addressing that particular need?
I would say we would then need to ask, what are the sort of the ends of what we're trying to do with education right now. Mm-hmm. So I think if I were to apply sort of a critical race theory lens into what you're talking about. So for example, I can't remember if this was the case in California, but I know other states, like even in New York, kind of they didn't have kids take state testing, mm-hmm. right? And so if you look at education, how in sort of every teacher is moved to literally just prepare students for test. For me, I would say, well, because of all these issues with inequity, how might we rethink using a critical race theory lens on what we need kids to do now, but also in the future? So maybe it's not about needing a computer, but maybe homework is just reading 20 pages with your parents. And instead of using a computer, maybe why don't you mail me something? Let's learn how to write letters. Why don't you just handwrite something and you mail it in? Maybe like there are other ways to sort of rethink education right now, but because the system is structured to move people through this filtration system that we call standardized testing, we don't know how to get past that. And so that's kind of how I would apply a critical race theory lens into what's happening now.
Obviously, I have selfish reasons for asking that question. These are questions that I'm wrestling with.
Right.
I have students who are facing these problems, systemic problems, and so I really appreciate both of your responses on that. So
Can I-
it is.
Well, let me say something
yeah,
though before
go ahead.
you go ahead. In terms of the committee of 10 with the NEA, there was a merger with the ATA, American Teacher Association, with the NEA, and it was because the ATA, which was the Black teacher organization, had the money, they were able to finance. NEA said, we will come, let's integrate. But with the committee of 10, its focus was the idea that every student would go to college. And we know, today that's not true. There was one curriculum focusing on whether you finished high school or whether you didn't finish high school. The curriculum you were given was focused on you going to college.
Mhm.
With one of the things the pandemic has made us very much aware of the fact is that students need to have the skills to function and to be successful in a global society. So career tech education, and which is a little bit beyond, in fact, it's far beyond vocational education. That when students leave high school, they do have a skill. They are able to be successful, whether they're in San Diego, whether they're in New York, whether they're in Japan, or whether they're in Nigeria, or whether they're in Europe, that they can be competitive and they do have a skill. So I think that's one thing that we've come to realize with our board, is that career tech education is extremely important. And the irony is that with historical Black colleges, when you graduated from a historical Black college, yes, you have an academic degree, but you also have a skill. If you want to major in business, then you should be able to run and say your business is dry cleaning, then you should be able to know the fabric. You should be able to, quote unquote, iron, laundry, know, as I said, know the fabric, know everything about that business, not just have some theoretical degree that, well, I'm a businessman, I have a BA degree in business or whatever. Okay. And I think education that's going to be the direction of education, is that what is it that our students can do? Whether it's soft skills, or whether it's the academic, or whether it's having those practical skills, for want of a better term. We want our students to have all of those, so that when they leave school, they're not in the delusion that they're going to go downtown and get a $50,000 a year job with only a high school diploma. Well, they can get that $50,000 job if they have the practicality associated with that. So I think that's, as I said before, that's one of the things that we've come to realize. Their CTE is going to be one of the waves of the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I so appreciate all of your insights, and we're at about a little after 12:30, so I'm sure that there are a lot of questions from the folks in chat. There's been a lot of activity in the chat, so I want to leave room for questions. So if you do have any questions for the panelists, please type those questions in the chat, and we'll pose those questions right now for the next half hour or so. And I just wanted to reiterate how much I appreciate your insights. Again, recognizing that I am in as much as I love City College, recognizing that I am in an institution that perpetuates inequality in the ways that I've explained. I don't know how to get around these dilemmas of structurally, my students, a good portion of my students aren't able to attend in the way that the institution would have them attend. And that needs to be understood, that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be put at the center of the conversation. And City College has done a good job of that. Like Eleanor said, we've given away a lot of hot spots. We've given away a lot of Chromebooks, etc. But in some ways, it feels like we're sort of putting Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on a problem, and not necessarily addressing the systemic nature of it. There are systemic ways in which Black folks are digitally locked out, and that needs to be at the center of the conversation. So I'd love to see some more questions. So Debbie Darden has a question, and I'll just, if whoever wants to just sort of jump in. After hearing all this wonderful information, where do we go from here to start change?
I think local elections, school board. I think it starts there. I think really, when we talk about inside game, I mean like inside in the trenches game. And so I think finding people who can run for school board, I think is a great start.
I would agree.
Debbie, sorry, Eleanor, we certainly appreciate you for that. Talk about the inside game in terms of where you're at. Your thoughts?
First and foremost, attend school board meetings. We have a public comment, you have the opportunity to speak, but just being in the room is so important. And yes, definitely run for office. It's a process, but it's a doable process. But again, being actively involved in the schools, being actively involved with your child, buying, instead of buying those, those tennis shoes, buy a book, read with your child.
Did you ever see like images of what?
You may not know his mic is on if he's joining from an iPhone.
Yeah, thanks. Great, thanks. So another question, thank you again for that, Miriam Aguilar Escobar. The inside game is happening, but is it really helping our students? I think that's sort of along the lines of, can you really institute change from within a systemically racist institution?
I think so. I would probably here's how I think we could think about this, right? So, if a bunch of white people and Republicans can go to a school board and change the way teachers are teaching history to the point where if you read a Ta-Nehisi Coates essay, you're getting fired. Well, yes, we can create some sort of change if we do the same thing. But what tends to happen is on the left, we tend to be reactionary and we're not like kind of on the offensive. We're typically on the defense. But I think if we approach things that way, I think if we take kind of what the right is doing and just hitting the ground running at the most inside levels, I think we have to kind of do that. So if we know they're hitting us at the school board level with critical race, their anti-critical race theory laws, I think we got to do the same thing, but in the opposite direction. So I think, yeah, so now we say, oh, okay, that's what you want to do. So here's how we're gonna do this with our school boards. And I think if they can do this sort of work, then I think we can do it too.
Yeah, Eleanor, your thoughts?
Well, we send our students to school. Other groups take their students to school, take their child to school. We send our child to school, and we entrust the school to educate our children. and so many with Asian parents, they take their children to school. When that child comes home, he has school again. Traditionally, historically, in quote unquote our Black families, that is not happening. You know, the child comes home, do you have homework? No. But the policy is that every child should read for 20 minutes every day, every school day. You know, we know that they should have at least 10 minutes of math practice every day. This is after school, and it's not happening. Parents need to be involved with the school, whether it's the PTA, whether it's attending board meetings, whether it's, you know, volunteering in the classroom. They need to be aware and understand what's going on, and they need to voice their concerns in a positive manner, because when we have, you know, the stereotype is that when you have Black people at a board meeting, you know, it's a hostile situation. No, it is not. It's not a hostile situation. But, you know, with all the chaos that's going on at school board meetings, you know, we need to be there as well. Simple as that.
Yeah.
And I agree that if you're there, you're a voter. And if you're there and you don't like what's going on, then you need to be actively involved in making changes to that policy, to that program, to that curriculum.
Yeah, so I'm looking at thank you again, and I'm looking at the chat, and there's a lot of comments there. If you do have a question, though, please be mindful and phrase it as a question, and I will, you know, I'll go ahead and pose those questions to the panel. There's more of a comment here, but I think we can phrase it as a question. Darwin Fishman writes, not sure how any Black person on the planet could oppose this definition of critical race theory or teaching critical race theory based on the correct definition. Is this a problem of definition or the way it's being presented? Because I'm seeing, and this obviously is being, it's almost like, you know, if you look at a Trump rally, the camera people will go through heroic efforts to find a Black person in the crowd. But you do see a lot of headlines about, you know, anti, you know, Black parent, you know, drops a mic on CRT, and it's usually an anti-CRT comment. I saw one of those headlines just this morning. So is this just a problem of, like I said in the morning, are terms being redefined, or is it a problem of how it's being presented?
Well, I understand the sort of language of the question, but I also think to assume that Black people have to have a certain ideology or have to have a certain opinion is sort of like, that's some like white people stuff. That's like racist in itself. And so like, I don't want to make it, we tend to like say, well, how could a Black person do this? Because every time a Black person does something, it's infinitely worse than if anyone else did it, even if it's something like oppose critical race theory. I'm not saying the question is doing this, but I wouldn't want to associate someone's sort of Blackness with a particular position they take, because no one is immune from anti-Blackness. And so I think it's important to understand that like Black people are people too, and sometimes we're victims of misinformation and we don't understand things, and we're able to have not fully formed opinions, and it's not indicative of who we are as Black people or our Blackness. It's just a Black person just may not know. And sometimes it feels good. It might give you some psychic relief to go, yeah, I can pull myself up by my bootstraps. Like I can do everything, you know, like it might feel good to make you believe that. And so I think there are lots of reasons why a Black person may not agree or believe with critical race theory, but I think that comes from not understanding it more so than anything else.
Yeah. And your thoughts, Eleanor?
I think, you know, like, as you said at the beginning, words, you know, words have been changed. Words have been, what used to be, you know, negative is positive, and what's positive is negative. in terms of language and nomenclature. For CRT, I think I understand it. I certainly experience it. I live it. Like it, granted, it came out of Harvard during the 60s, but in terms of us as human beings here, it's always been there. It has always existed. Now, in terms of us labeling what it is and having inflammatory language associated with it, whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left, that's entirely something different. The issue is basically how do we move ahead? What can we do so that we're uplifted as a people? Whether it's economics, whether it's academics, whether it's societal, we're always the ones that are labeled as being at the very bottom. In the news today, they talked about the fact that Black people were going to be the ones to suffer the most coming out of the pandemic. There's someone on the program who's talking about the fact that when we come out of the pandemic, Blacks will be the ones to have be the greatest group of people to have lost their homes. Why? Why does that, why is it us? And if it is us, and it's always seemingly has been us historically to the very day, what are we doing? How do we do it to make it not us? When we have people coming from other countries into the United States, and for 6 months, suddenly, they're at the bottom, but 6 months later, they're totally invisible in terms of being quote unquote at the bottom, and we're still there.
That's a critical race theory question. Critical race theory can help us answer that question. And that's why I think it's so important. I'm not saying that a universal basic income is the answer, but I'd imagine for the people who, it probably helped, right? And so if you're talking about poverty or whatever the case may be, how we're negatively impacted after this, critical race theory can help us unpack that. And so that exact question, why after this pandemic will we be impacted the most? Let's figure out a framework to navigate that question. Let's navigate why, what are the historical implications of property and home ownership? Well, what is there any history of racism rooted in that? It's redlining, we can, and that's what critical race theory can do. So if we know the things that we need to lift, then we can really get to some answers. And so that's why I think it's so important. That's something that you could ask a classroom, you can ask your students, why do you think? Well, I don't know. What happened? People lost their homes. What's the history of home ownership in this country?
Yeah, and I think the rub is, and getting back to the question and the motivation for the question, is that, systemically, Black voices tend not to be amplified unless they are promoting anti-Black unless they're promoting anti-Black narratives. And that's also a critical race theory question. I suppose you can ask the question that way. Why is that? But we do have a few. Let's see, we got just over 10 minutes left. We talked about after-school programs and ways that we can address some of the challenges that students are facing. Are the after-school programs supporting these students with their homework? Are you aware of those programs? Probably Eleanor would.
I'm aware of our program in Oceanside. We have an after-school and before-school program, which focuses on homework. We have partners like the Boys and Girls Club, in which students can go and receive work with their homework. So it is effective, but again, we have teachers that we've hired, especially during the pandemic, who were to tutor students. But the bottom line goes back to, we need the parent involvement. We really do.
And that goes to Carl's question. How do we impact those youth that don't have the support at home? Because again, not every student's going to have that support. Do we?
Correct. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we really amped up our before school and after school program, because that's one of the things that was very glaring to us.
Yeah. Anthony, your thoughts?
Yeah, I used to work in an after school program. And I think in general, like parenting, I don't have kids, but I know a lot of people that do. And parenting just seems hard. Parenting just in general is difficult. Parenting in a grotesque capitalist society that works people to the bone makes it really hard to support your kid. So even when I say things, and I don't say them I don't say, run for a local school board flippantly. Well, you got to have resources to do that. Well, how do you go to a school board meeting if you got 3 kids at home and you're a single parent? You might be working 2 jobs, so then you miss the school board meeting. And then it's like, well, I got to find a babysitter. Well, where do you get the money to do that if you're not even working a job that you can, that will give you funds to do that? And so like, it's hard. And then you throw on all of the ways in which our country moves people to become violent and angry and emotionally repressed. Then it just the layers on top of layers on top of layers on top of layers. And so I think at least when I think of the things that helped me as a kid, and I grew up in Southeast San Diego, was I had a community. And it doesn't mean that everyone in the community was perfect. There were, some questionable characters on 50th Street, but within that, there was a community. And so if I knew, if I was outside, the woman who lived a couple doors down was watching out for the kids. Doesn't mean she was, this perfect beacon of morality, but she watched out for the kids. I knew that, and a lot of the kids had my dad as a role model, and he coached at the YMCA along with my uncles and things like that. And so, and that still impacts kids to, they're adults now, but I still hear about it, And so I think it is sort of a burden that we have to have, but it's a traditional burden that we've used to empower. And so I think we have to find ways to use our own community resources. And I think that's the best thing we can do for kids, is show kids that kids just want to be loved. They just want to feel loved. They just want to feel understood. And so just let's find ways to, within our communities, to reinforce that message.
Oh, thanks.
I agree 100% with that. It is the quality of time as well as the quantity of time. And when I talk about parents, I'm also talking about guardians. I grew up in Southeast San Diego as well, so I'm very much aware of the community involvement. And I don't think it's subsided, but I think that, yes, people have to work 2 or 3 jobs, but schools have babysitting service during school board meetings. Again, it goes back to, what do we value in terms of what's going to benefit us and benefit our children? And if you're at a school and it doesn't offer that, you need to make sure it does happen. We talk about using our voice, and this is the opportunity to use our voice. Education is it's the foundation. It's the foundation of the society. It's the foundation of democracy. And we need to be very much involved with seeing how that democracy goes.
Yeah. And so we talked a lot about school boards. There's a sort of a comment and a question from Armando, and I'm sorry your last name is cut off. It just says Fari, but I'm assuming there's more to it. But in any case, Armando asked, just beyond school boards, given that citizens have the power and can initiate change, how can the community be better informed?
information is being informed is hard, man. I can't even pretend to have an answer about that, just because I don't know what everyone's context is in terms of like where they live. But I know what's helpful for me when I'm trying to understand something that's happening in New York City or even within my neighborhood in East Harlem. I read my local papers, and if you feel like your local papers are kind of like white centric, there's some, see if you could find a black paper or something like that. Like that's sort of my lens, just because I'm a journalist, and so I don't know if that helps folks in San Diego, but that would kind of be my approach if I was concerned about information.
Yeah. And just generally being out in the community, but no matter what
Right.
organization is, belong to an organization. Ellen?
Eleanor, I was going to say that it's ironic that when I was growing up, and maybe the community, but I won't say the community was smaller, but I do know that we did get the information. And it's ironic that we have all of this technology, we have all the media, we have the voice and viewpoint. But for some reason, folks, do you support the voice and viewpoint? That's a rhetorical question. Do you support the voice and viewpoint? Do you listen to some of the radio stations that do promote Black activities, Black involvement? That's the key, there's a lot of competition for our dollars. There's a lot of competition for our ears. So we have to make a choice. Are we focused on the community, or are we focused on what's outside of the community?
Yeah, and this will probably be there's a lot of questions here, but this will probably be the last question, given that we have about 5 minutes left. We talked a lot about the inside game, being on the school boards, et cetera. What about along with the inside, this is Clarence's question. Along with the inside game, don't you think the outside game is important? And what sorts of things can we do in terms of our outside game that might be impactful?
Most important thing is voting. Seriously. Yes, the outside game is important. I think we've talked about that already, that we need people on the inside, we need people on the outside. And I think we've talked about it. Anthony, you want to add to it? But basically, we can't be idle. That's what the key is. We can't be idle. We can't be indifferent. We can't just follow someone's monologue. We can't be always on the left with their convenience, nor can we be anti-right with their issues. Okay, we need to be aware, and we need to really think in terms of what is best for us individually and collectively.
Yeah, I was reading an article about Harry Belafonte this morning, and it kind of, what you said kind of reminded me of something that he had said some time ago when he talked about what Dr. King gave us and what Malcolm X gave us and what the Black Panther Party gave us. Whether you agreed with them or not, that was the movement at its best, and at our worst was when we did nothing. Your thoughts, Anthony?
No, that was perfect. Like that's kind of how I feel. Like I grew up until into my 20s just being in the Martin Luther King Jr. camp. Like that was like, sort of the god of protests and civil rights. I mean, still is. And I was kind of anti Black Panthers and anything else. It was only about Martin Luther King Jr. And then the more I learned about the Black Panthers, it was like, oh no, well, how can I take some of that? And then it was like, well, how can I learn from Black academics and theorists? How can I learn from that? Now let me take a little bit from the poets and writers and musicians, and let me take a little bit of that. And each one has a strength that can be perfectly employed at a certain time. And so I think it's just kind of knowing where what time it is and how to employ that particular strategy in that moment.
And maybe that's one of the takeaways from this discussion, whether you agree with critical race theory or not. There's an advantage, there's a gift that it has to offer that can be useful in solving and addressing a particular set of problems. And why deny yourself a critical tool on your tool belt, right?
Correct.
So thank you so much. I think Ellen wanted to jump in the last part. I know we've got like 1 minute, and I know she had a hard stop at 2:00.
I'm here.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say thank you again for this discussion. It's been super helpful for me in terms of where I'm at and addressing the problems that I'm addressing within my institution, which has some systemic, again, problems with it. So I appreciate you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think instead of being maybe critical thinkers, we need to be analytical thinkers in terms of as we move forward.
Anthony, you have some last words for us?
No, thank you for having me. It's been nice to join y'all from the East Coast, from Harlem. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. I would like to thank everyone for showing up today in this space. It's been amazing, and we have a great panelist. I wish we were all in the same room. We could give them a big hand clap because they were all just so awesome. And thank you, Professor Spearman, for moderating. You are amazing. I can't wait to get to know you even more. You're right here in San Diego, and we will be reaching out to you again. And our own Commissioner Evans, who serves with me on the Human Relations Commission and keeps us in good trouble. Thank you for being here, and your passion and your love for children is so appreciated, because it is a sacrifice on your part, but you're sacrificing for our kids. Even though you're in Oceanside, I know Oceanside, the impact that you're having up to the NCAA, where you did some work with our kids around some of the hate incidents that are occurring. We really appreciate you, Commissioner Evans. And of course, our own Anthony Conright. I am so proud. We are so proud of you, a San Diego native. That's just, oh my God, I can't wait to see your future and where you're going to end up. You are magnificent. Stay strong, stand in your purpose. And we will benefit from the contributions that you make. Just think we have had an intergenerational panel that are amazing members of society that we appreciate you and grateful for. It is now 2:01. You all have a great day. I'm going to go on over to the Old Globe Theater. Come down to the World Beat Center. A lot of stuff going on. The noise got really loud, so I'm now sitting in my car, but I'm moving on to the Old Globe Theater. You all have a great weekend. And thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
you.